Okay, let's now look at this earnings growth area, and it's a specific formula that's quite unusual, so I thought we'd look at this one separately. So this formula we're going to use here for earnings growth, but it also works later in the course for dividend growth. And there's your formula. The growth is the nth root of the latest number, the most recent number, the latest dividend or the latest earnings, over the earliest dividend or the earliest earnings, and then we minus 1 at the very end. Now that nth root thing is something that students often have trouble with that putting in their calculator. And on most calculators, you have to use the shift button to be able to do that. So for most calculators, you press shift, and then if you look at the little yellow writing above the buttons, you'll find one that looks like a square root that's got a little solid yellow box next to the square root button. That's the one you need. If you're struggling to find it, you can find all sorts of online tutorials on YouTube, for example, about how to do that in your calculator. So a quick bit of Googling will help you out there. Okay, now things to be careful of with this formula. N is the number of years of growth, either in dividends or in earnings. So if there are, let's say, 6 years of earnings, N would be 5, because between 6 years of earnings, there's only 5 periods of growth. Let's now look at an example to put this into practice. So here, this company's got 3 years worth of dividends. And we're asked for what's the annual growth rate in dividends. Now this could be earnings just as easily. Earnings, dividends, exactly the same approach. There's our formula. So what I'd like you to have a go at is doing this for yourself. Pause the recording here, have a go, and then we'll compare. So, what numbers need to go in this formula? Well, N is 2 here. There's 3 years worth of dividends, and that means 2 years worth of growth. 1 year of growth between year 1 and year 2, and a second year of growth between year 2 and year 3. The latest dividend, the most recent one, is 15 million. And the oldest dividend, the earliest one, is 10 million. And if you're thinking, oh, we've just ignored that one in the middle, you're absolutely right. We have. And that's one of the real limitations of this formula. It only takes the first and the last point. Okay, so those are the numbers we need to go into the formula. Let's now practice actually putting them into our calculator. So here's the numbers you're going to need to put into your calculator. It's the second root, square root, of 15 million over 10 million minus 1. Now, I know that that just means the square root, right? But what I want you to do is to practice using that shift button if you can. So have a go at sticking this in your calculator, and then we'll compare answers. So I like to simplify it first of all. So I'm firstly doing the bit of division that is within that formula. So just simplify it down. And then I'm pressing 2 shift and that little X funny button of 1.5. And that gets me to 1.2247 and a load of change. Now I'm leaving that number in my calculator and then pressing -1 to get me down to 0.23 or 23%. If you didn't get that, have another go at putting it into your calculator. And if you're struggling, there's loads of good videos on YouTube for you to have a go about inputting nth root formulas. So just do a bit of Googling. Let's now summarise what we went over in this recording. We started with those financial return formulas. Things like return on shareholders' funds, gearing, and your interest cover. At this level, you're really expected to know these formulas, but also be able to manipulate them and to see how they change when a business's performance is amended. So we had a look at some calculations to see how they come up. And then we focused particularly on that earnings growth formula, the nth root. Really quite challenging that. If you found it difficult going, don't worry, that's normal. A bit of practice really helps. That concludes this recording.